Most of you woke up today believing the world still plays by yesterday's rules. But while you were sleeping, the board was flipped. What happened on February 28th in Iran wasn't just another airstrike in the desert, it was the end of an era. With the collapse of the regime's inner circle and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the countdown has begun for a global shockwave we haven't seen since the 70s. Oil is no longer just a commodity, it's the trigger for the next great war. Are you ready to hear what the mainstream media is still too afraid to tell you? To make sense of today's chaos, we have to dissect what happened in the early hours of February 28th. The world was blindsided. But for those tracking intelligence briefings, the writing was on the wall. The operation, coordinated between Mossad and U.S. Central Command, didn't just target facilities. It went for the regime's brain. In an unprecedented precision strike, the top leadership, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, was eliminated while meeting in a fortified compound. But why now? Why risk total war? The answer lies in the absolute collapse of the Geneva negotiations. Iran was weeks, perhaps days, away from declaring full nuclear status. The West decided the cost of a war today was lower than the cost of a nuclear Iran tomorrow. Imagine the impact within a highly centralized, theocratic power structure. Iran isn't a democracy where a VP steps in and life goes on. It's a system built on the divine authority of a single man. When that man vanishes instantly, what's left is an electrifying power vacuum. IRGC communications collapsed within the first 40 minutes. High-ranking generals were forced to make independent calls without Tehran's clearance, and that's when the real danger began. Iranian security doctrine has always relied on strategic patience, but with the head of the snake severed, patience is over. What followed was the automatic activation of the regime's survival protocol. Without a clear central command, missile units scattered across the Dasht-e-Kavir desert were given the green light. The catalyst wasn't just the death of a leader, it was the destruction of the final barrier preventing the IRGC from unleashing its full arsenal against its neighbors. As flames still engulfed the rubble in Tehran, U.S. intelligence detected the move everyone feared: anti-ship missile batteries mobilizing toward the coast. Iran knew it couldn't win an aerial war against the U.S., so they decided to strike where it hurts the average Westerner most: the wallet. Khamenei's assassination was check, but Iran still had a masterstroke left on the economic chessboard. One of the West's greatest illusions was believing that by decapitating the command in Tehran, the Iranian defense system would be paralyzed. But Iran's doctrine is unique. They don't just fight at their borders, they fight through others. Immediately following the confirmation of Khamenei's death, the automatic retaliation protocol was activated across 4 simultaneous fronts. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, the most heavily armed militia on the planet, abandoned its defensive posture. These weren't just Katyusha rockets. They were precision-guided missiles striking critical infrastructure in Haifa and Tel Aviv. The goal? To force Israeli air defenses like the Iron Dome to operate well beyond their exhaustion point. Meanwhile, in Iraq and Syria, the remnants of pro-Iranian militias began a manhunt. U.S. bases in Jordan and Qatar, previously considered safe rearguard zones, were hit by swarms of kamikaze drones. The strategy is clear: start a fire so large, in so many places at once, that the U.S. can't prioritize where to put it out. But the most lethal move came from the south, out of Yemen. The Houthis, who had been testing global trade for months, received their final orders. They didn't just launch missiles at merchant ships, they initiated a total sensor blockade of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Understand the technical danger here. Iran has created what we call a saturation network. They know they can't win a naval or aerial battle against a U.S. carrier strike group, but they know a swarm of $1,000, $20,000 drones can overwhelm a $1 billion defense system. To the outside observer, it looks like disorganized
disorganized chaos. To a strategist, it's a symphony of asymmetric warfare. Every strike by every proxy is designed to drain the West's resources, time, and political will. As missiles rain down on Iraq and drones cross the desert, the world realizes that Iran doesn't need a naval fleet to stop the planet. It only needs its tentacles. If you want to understand why the Pentagon has hesitated to launch a ground invasion of Iran for 40 years, don't look at troop numbers, look at the map. Iran isn't a flat plain like Iraq. Iran is a fortress of stone. Nearly 70% of Iranian territory is made up of mountains and impenetrable deserts. To the west, you have the Zagros Mountains, a 900-mile natural barrier separating the country from the Arab world. For an invading army, crossing the Zagros isn't just a fight against the enemy, it's a fight against verticality. Every canyon is a pre-staged kill zone where a small group of defenders can stall entire tank divisions. In the heart of the country, the landscape changes, but it doesn't get any easier. You have the Dasht-e-Kavir and the Dasht-e-Lut, salt deserts so hostile they are virtually uninhabited. This is where Iran hides its missile cities, underground silos carved beneath hundreds of feet of solid rock, immune even to the heaviest airstrikes we saw on February 28th. Geopolitically, Iran is a land island. To the north, the Caspian Sea. To the south, the Persian Gulf. The only viable entry points are narrow bottlenecks that Tehran's generals have studied for millennia. This creates what we call the defense-in-depth doctrine. Even if an enemy breaches the coast, they would find themselves lost in a mountain labyrinth where satellite technology loses its edge and warfare becomes brutally primitive.
That is why the Iranian retaliation focused on the sea and the Strait of Hormuz. They know their geography allows them to survive a land siege for years, while the rest of the world collapses economically in months. Invading Iran isn't like invading Iraq or Afghanistan. It's like trying to occupy a fortress where the ground itself is your enemy. While the West dominates the skies, the Iranian regime still dominates the earth, and they are counting on every inch of those mountains to ensure the cost of a foreign victory is simply too high to pay. As the smoke cleared over the leadership compound in Tehran, Iran faced the very nightmare its founders had spent decades trying to avoid, an absolute power vacuum. In a system where the final word always comes from a supreme leader, what happens when there is no one left to give it? Officially, the regime scrambled to maintain a facade of continuity. Alireza Arafi, a prominent clerical figure, was appointed acting leader to soothe the masses and the religious establishment. But behind the scenes, intelligence reveals a silent, deadly civil war. On one side, you have the pragmatists and the traditional clergy, desperately trying to salvage what's left of the economy and avert a full-scale invasion. On the other, you have the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Without Khamenei's thumb over them, these generals are no longer just a military wing. They have become the true masters of the chessboard. For them, survival won't come through diplomacy, but through aggressive escalation. This internal rift is what makes 2026 Iran so unpredictable. When you see contradictory orders coming out of Tehran, 1 minute talking ceasefire, the next launching drones against allied ports, you are witnessing a headless government. Acting leader Arafi may have religious authority, but he doesn't have his finger on the missile trigger. That control now rests with regional IRGC commanders who are increasingly going rogue, driven by either a thirst for vengeance or raw political survival. The danger for the West is that there is no longer a red phone to call. There is no single leader to negotiate a de-escalation with. Today's Iran is a many-headed hydra, and every single one is ready to strike just to prove it still has teeth. Until a clear successor is consolidated, the country will remain in a state of controlled chaos, where the greatest risk isn't a deliberate declaration of war, but a catastrophic miscalculation by a mid-level general who decides his moment of glory has finally arrived.
To understand the true motive behind the Tehran strike, we have to talk about what was happening deep inside the tunnels of Fordo. For years, the world debated Iran's breakout time, the window needed to enrich enough uranium for a nuclear warhead. By February 2026, that window was no longer measured in months, but in days. The collapse of the Geneva talks earlier this year was the ultimate signal. Western intelligence confirmed the regime had crossed the red line, uranium enrichment at 90%, weapons grade. Iran was no longer pursuing the bomb, they were assembling the trigger system. But here's the technical detail most people overlook. The Fordo facilities were built inside a mountain, shielded by 260 feet of solid rock. They're immune to almost every conventional missile in existence. The only way to stop the program was to decapitate the leadership holding the activation codes and dismantle the command and control centers before the final assembly order could be issued. The February 28th strike was a high-stakes gamble. By eliminating Khamenei and the IRGC top brass, the U.S. and Israel attempted to paralyze the nuclear chain of command. But there's a catch. In the chaos of succession, with interim leaders like Ali Reza Arafi stepping in, no one knows for sure where the experimental warheads are located or who holds the final authority over them now. We are at what analysts call the point of no return. If Iran decides its only guarantee of survival against a full-scale invasion is the use of a tactical nuclear weapon, the threshold of war changes forever. The nuclear factor has turned a regional dispute into an existential dilemma for the planet. The world doesn't just fear Iranian missiles, it fears what's in them. And in 2026, the time to prevent that reality has simply run out. To the casual observer, the fall of Tehran might look like an isolated event in a distant desert, but for your wallet, February 28th marked the beginning of a painful reconfiguration. When the Strait of Hormuz was slammed shut, it wasn't just the oil that stopped flowing, it was the world's confidence in the global financial system that cracked. Think about the logic. The Western world built its wealth on the back of cheap energy and secure shipping lanes. With Iran out of the game and oil hitting historic highs, the inflation you see at the grocery store isn't transitory. It's structural, but there's something even deeper happening behind the closed doors of power. Russia and China haven't just been standing by. In the Iranian collapse, they saw an opportunity to accelerate de-dollarization. We're witnessing the birth of a parallel trade system where the US dollar is losing its status as the world's safe haven. If the Eastern Axis decides the West no longer has the right to police energy routes, the cost of living you know today will become nothing more than a memory of a stable past. For the seasoned investor, the message is clear. Geopolitics is back as the primary driver of the economy. It's no longer about corporate balance sheets. It's about who controls the gas valves and the maritime choke points. What happens in the Persian Gulf today determines whether your retirement will have any value tomorrow.
Iran is the catalyst for a new economic order where globalization, as we've known it since the 90s, has come to an end. We are entering an era of closed blocks, resource protectionism, and financial survival. The conflict in Iran doesn't end when the bombs stop falling. It's only just beginning to be felt in your bank account and in the price of everything you consume. The board has been flipped, and the rules of the economic game have just been rewritten in Farsi and Mandarin. What you've seen here isn't a theory, it's the mechanics of a system under extreme pressure. The February 28th strike removed the centerpiece of a regime that survived for decades, but the resulting power vacuum is, by its very nature, unstable and violent. With the rise of figures like Ali Reza Arafi and the dangerous autonomy of IRGC generals, today's Iran is an internal combustion engine with no relief valve. The closure of Hormuz and the realignment of alliances with the China-Russia bloc mark the end of dollar-protected globalization. The reality check is a bitter pill to swallow. The West's energy stability now depends on a chessboard where the pieces move on their own, driven by vengeance or nuclear despair. Geopolitics abhors a vacuum. The space left by the failure of Geneva diplomacy is being filled by missiles and naval blockades. This is the landscape. These are the variables. The briefing is concluded.
If you're looking for analysis that cuts through the mainstream narrative and you prefer to understand the real strategy behind these conflicts, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Our next briefing will cover the movements on the eastern border. Don't be blind to what's coming.